Draft week is almost here, and so I'm here to answer the burning question: what are the Texans' needs? More specifically, what are the top 5 needs the Texans have as it stands right now?
To throw the punches off. He floats one wide open, and there he goes. Touchdown for a Texan touchdown.
I'd like to preface this by saying that while this list is in order and it's how I observe the Texans' needs, I do feel like almost every need on this list is something that the Texans can afford to not address in the draft. So in general, the Texans are kind of in a best player available mode. So if they don't address one of the positions on this list, I do not view them any less for that. Before we move into the top 5, we'll start with our honorable mention. The honorable mention is running back. Now, I know that might shock some people, but based on what we know about Bobby Slowick's scheme, a lot of running backs tend to pick it up better in the second year. So with Joe Mixon there and Dameon Pierce entering his second year in the system, I mean, sure, I do think the Texans should draft a running back late to shore up and, round out the running room, if you will. But I don't view it as a top 5 need for the team right now. Coming in at number 5 is offensive line, and I know what some of you guys are thinking, which is the offensive line needs to improve a lot. It's part of the reason the run game wasn't good. It's interesting I put those two back to back, but I mean, I've said it all offseason long, and I'll say it here for you right now. The Texans' offensive line doesn't need to be fixed in the draft. It needs to heal. So the reason I put it at 5, though, is because of all the positions on the offense, I will say it's probably the one that could afford to be addressed in the draft, but it's not a top tier need. I would say maybe you're looking potentially for a left guard. You could be looking for someone to potentially take over for Kenyon Green if you don't believe that guy's on the roster, or if you don't have a lot of faith in Kenyon Green. And otherwise, you might look to pick up a tackle for tackle depth, but none of those are pressing enough needs that I foresee the Texans touching them in the first 4 rounds of the draft. So it's a need, but really, I mean, I don't know. I don't view it as like a deep need for the team. At number 4, I have safety, and this one really, it comes down to one thing. Jimmy Ward is great. Good safety. Just health is a thing. So there's depth is a concern here. And the other part is on the off chance that Jalen Petrie doesn't figure it out, on the off chance that the issues he's been having are not just a one-off like sophomore slump, and he is in fact, maybe falling off a little bit, you want to have that backup plan there. When we look at the Texans depth chart, you've got a couple of veteran guys, and you got a couple guys that did step in at points last year, but overall, I think that this is where we finally step into the territory of this is a team need. I'd say the top 4 positions that I'm going to address are things that I can honestly say the team needs to address. So yeah, I mean, it's all depth too. So safety, get a guy in the 4th. I don't know, like someone that can step in, isn't expected to be the guy day one, but could possibly develop in the presence of D'Amico and enter that realm where talent is developed and could like step up and be that guy. At number 3, we have cornerback, and some might be shocked that this is that low. Wait till you hear the next 2 positions in which order they're in. But with cornerback, you could view it one of 2 ways. Either you look at what they did in free agency and you go, oh, they added a bunch of, X top 5, top 10 picks in the draft, and they're just going to develop them and find the talent that didn't show up when they were playing in other situations. And if you view it that way, adding a corner in the draft becomes like maybe a late draft need. But if you think that you can go into this draft and find a starter at the nickel or a cornerback 2, I mean, I'm all for it. I think that I could see this position being taken by the Texans at any number of places across the board, depending on where the value is. I could see them very well not drafting one high, and we'll find out a lot about what they think about their cornerback room based off of how this draft goes. At number 2, shocking to some, but I mean, I don't know. When I look at the depth chart, I think that while this is a huge need and it has a case for number 1, I don't think it's bigger than the other need, because all of the needs, like I said on this list, are not starter needs, they're depth needs. And so when I look at it through that lens, defensive tackle comes in at number 2 for me. I look at the rotation the Texans have, and I mean, it's like a bunch of role players that can, when used together correctly and rotating, could create a defensive line that's serviceable. And so I know it doesn't have like a lot of star power on the interior, but I think that if we give it time and we watch the Texans, we'll find out how they feel about that rotation, because that's a lot of what defense is, and why depth is factored so heavily into my list, is that it's about guys that are in a lot of ways going to just be rotating for a certain percentage of snaps. We're not going to see them take up closer to the 70, 80, or 90%, snap count. So in this draft, a lot of the players it's probably one of the reasons the Texans traded out of the first round too, is a lot of the players they would be looking to get are just not every down players, unless they're looking to get a cornerback too, which would massively bump up cornerback from 3 to a little bit higher for me. But like I said, I think that that's probably not what they're doing. But defensive tackle, I think if the right prospect is available that fits what they want to do and they think could make an immediate impact, they might do that. They might trade up for Braden Fisk. They might trade up for Johnny Newton. They might take Tavondre Sweat if he slips. But overall, I don't view it as the number one need for the team. Coming in at number 1 is linebacker. And I know what you're thinking. James, we have Azeez Al-Shaair, we have, Christian Harris, Henry To'oTo'o. We don't even run a lot of 3 linebacker sets. It's a lot of 2 linebacker in the modern NFL. So like, there's your depth right there. I'm looking at the linebacker depth chart, and let me read it off to you, assuming that we're going to most times run 2 linebackers on the field. So as I said, Azeez Al-Shaair and Christian Harris. And then if we're running a 3 linebacker set, the expected starter would be Henry To'oTo'o. And then the rest of the linebacker depth chart looks like Jake Hansen, Neville Hewitt, and Delshon Phillips. I don't know about you, but I mean, and it could turn out to be, I feel like I might have said the same thing last offseason about Blake Cashman, honestly. So maybe the Texans are looking at what they have and they're going, well, we signed, Delshon Phillips is going to step up and he's going to be that guy who shows something, but in a position that rotates, probably not as much as the line. I think depth is important, and I just think that a lot of people are glossing over the fact that the Texans almost entirely lack depth at the linebacker position. And with that in mind, that's why moving forward, you'll see me in a lot of mock drafts put Edgerrin Cooper in the high end. Maybe if you wanted to go with 59, you could pick like Jeremiah Trotter. I think the Texans could very well be the first team to take a linebacker off the board. But I mean, I can't help but think that linebacker is the most pressing need for this team. Because like I said, I'll say it once, I'll say it 100 times, depth is the lens through which I think a lot of people need to look at this lineup when they assess where the needs are. And I said at the beginning of the video, if the Texans don't address linebacker, I think that's the one position where I might be hesitant. But overall, any position on this list, if the Texans don't address it in the draft, I think they should be fine. Unless like the injury bug hits very heavily, across the board. But a lot of these positions that are needs for the Texans are really needs because of the depth that the team needs at those positions. Before I go, I'll leave you with this. There's one more position that I've mocked that a lot of people don't really understand since the Stephon Diggs trade. And so I kind of have to explain it myself, but I've really been favorable of like a 4th or 5th round draft of like Ainias Smith out of Texas A&M. He's a wide receiver, and a lot of people are like, James, that's not really a need for this team. We have 8 wide receivers on the roster if you don't include guys that were practice squad last year. It's a pretty stacked position at the top end, and even in the depth, when you look at Noah Brown, you could say like, oh yeah, this team is pretty well equipped at the position. So why would we draft a wide receiver? And the real reason for that is if we look at punt return and kick return. You could say Tank Dell might be a guy. I think a lot of people, myself included, would like to see Tank Dell more focused on being a wide receiver than returning kicks. I mean, if that's what they think is best, then there's no need to follow this train of thought. You can just stop watching, stop listening, and skip to the end. But, I mean, right now on the depth chart, unofficial, Desmond King is listed as the punt returner and Dameon Pierce is listed as the kick returner. I think that it would be worthwhile, especially with the new kick return system that the NFL is installing, for the Texans to find a guy like Ainias Smith who's explosive in the return game and give him a shot to contend for that job, because it could make a difference. The Texans special teams in general have made the difference, and there's been a little bit of churn there with the change in punters. But overall, I think the one area of special teams that maybe could afford to improve is the return game with the new rules the NFL is installing. So with that would be why I would address maybe grabbing a wide receiver or a corner in the draft if you think that they're good at returning kicks. Well, this has been I think I'm going with bullpen bit. That's what I'm going to do. This has been another bullpen bit where we talk very briefly about a specific topic, short form, whatever. So thanks for tuning in. Thanks for listening. If you're listening, as always, stay classy, Houston. And until next time, vamos Texans. Thanks for tuning into The Bullpen, a Texans podcast, part of the Fans First Sports Network. Please like, comment, subscribe, and follow along for more Texans talk from The Bullpen.